Hey guys, tonight we step into the gritty, tooth-grinding world of medieval dentistry, where a throbbing molar could mean a one-way ticket to misery. Picture yourself trudging through a muddy village, the air thick with smoke and the stench of livestock. Your jaw aches, a dull pulse that's been growing sharper by the day. Every chew feels like a betrayal, and the local dentist is probably just the guy who shaves beards and lops off limbs. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without wincing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're chilling tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval hamlet, circa 1300, and your tooth is screaming. The pain is a hot coal lodged in your jaw, radiating with every heartbeat. Around you, the village hums with life. Blacksmiths hammer iron, children chase geese, and a baker pulls rye loaves from a clay oven. But your world narrows to that one rebellious tooth. Dentistry, as you'd hope to know it, doesn't exist. No sterile offices, no whirring drills, no numbing shots. Instead, you're at the mercy of a world where tooth care is a mix of guesswork, grit, and grim folklore. Mainstream history tells us medieval people suffered rampant dental issues. Cavities, abscesses, and tooth loss were as common as fleas on a dog. Life expectancy hovered around 30, and bad teeth didn't help. A quirky tidbit? Some believed toothaches were caused by tiny worms burrowing inside your gums, a theory that lingered for centuries. Historians still argue whether this toothworm myth came from observing real decay or just wild imagination. You shuffle toward the village square, where a crowd gathers around a man with a stained apron and an unsettling grin. He's the barber surgeon, the closest thing to a dentist you'll find. His table is littered with tools that look more suited for torture than healing. Iron pliers, a rusty knife, and a bowl of something that smells like fermented herbs. You're not sure if you're here for a cure or a public spectacle. The crowd whispers about your plight, some offering sympathy, others betting on how loud you'll scream. Medieval dentistry wasn't private, it was a community event, like a hanging or a market day. You notice a woman selling charms nearby, muttering about warding off tooth demons. You're tempted, but your pain demands action, not amulets. The barber surgeon beckons you closer, his breath reeking of ale. He squints at your mouth, poking your swollen gum with a grimy finger. Bad spirit in there, he grunts, as if your tooth is possessed. You'd laugh if it didn't hurt so much. Joking aside, this guy's your best shot at relief, but his methods are as scientific as a rooster predicting rain. He might yank the tooth, burn your gums with a hot iron, or smear on a paste made of crushed nettles and who knows what. Ever wonder why medieval skeletons often have missing teeth? Spoiler, it wasn't old age. Extractions were the go-to fix, and survival wasn't guaranteed. Infection was a bigger killer than the toothache itself. You glance at the crowd, spotting a monk scribbling notes. He's probably documenting your suffering for some monastery record, because even in the Middle Ages, someone's always taking notes. The church had a weird grip on medicine back then, preaching that pain was God's will but also offering prayers for relief. You're not sure if you should pray or just brace yourself. The barber surgeon grabs a pair of pliers, and your stomach lurches. You're about to learn why medieval dentistry was less about healing and more about endurance. Imagine going to the dentist today and being handed a stick to bite on. That's the vibe here. No Novocaine, no reclining chair, just you and your pain in a public showdown. As he leans in, you catch a whiff of something foul. Maybe his tools, maybe his lunch. You'd give anything for a modern toothbrush, but those won't exist for centuries. Toothbrushes, by the way, were a Chinese invention, but Europe was still chewing on twigs or rubbing their teeth with cloth. Fun fact, some medieval folks used hazelnut shells as abrasive toothpaste. Sounds like a crunchy nightmare, right? You're starting to realize that dental care in this era is a gamble. Will you walk away with one less tooth? Or will you limp away with a fever that takes you out by next week? The crowd's eyes are on you, and the barber surgeon's pliers gleam dully in the sunlight. You clench your fists, ready for the worst. Your mind drifts to the stories you've heard. Tales of people cauterizing their gums with hot pokers or drinking concoctions that taste like regret. Historians still argue whether these remedies did more harm than good, but you're leaning toward harm. The barber surgeon mutters something about balancing humors, and you roll your eyes internally. Medieval medicine was obsessed with the idea that your body's fluids, blood, phlegm, bile, needed to be in harmony. A toothache? Probably too much black bile. The cure? Maybe bleeding you with leeches or, worse, pulling the tooth with no regard for hygiene. You're not just fighting a toothache. You're fighting a whole worldview that thinks pain is a cosmic test. The pliers hover closer, and you brace for impact. This is medieval dentistry, raw, unfiltered, and about as pleasant as a kick from a mule. You're not sure if you'll make it through this, but the crowd's watching, and there's no backing out now. The pain in your jaw is a drumbeat, and the barber surgeon's your conductor. Ready or not, you're about to dive deeper into this world of dental dread. You're still in the village square, the air buzzing with the chatter of onlookers and the sharp tang of smoke from a nearby fire. Your tooth throbs like a war drum, and the barber surgeon's rusty pliers are still hovering too close for comfort. This guy, with his stained apron and questionable hygiene, isn't just here to trim beards or lance boils. He's your dentist, and that's a problem. In medieval times, barber surgeons were the go-to for dental work, a mainstream fact that makes you wince harder than the toothache itself. These weren't trained professionals. They were jacks of all trades, equally likely to cut your hair or amputate your leg. You're starting to wish you'd stayed home with your pain. The barber surgeon squints at your mouth, his breath a mix of ale and something you'd rather not identify. Open wider, he grumbles, as if you're not already gagging from the situation. You comply, feeling the crowd's eyes boring into you. This isn't a private appointment, it's a spectacle, and you're the star. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some barber surgeons doubled as entertainers, pulling teeth to the beat of a drum to draw a crowd. Your guy doesn't have a drum, but he's got an audience, and they're eating this up. You catch a glimpse of a kid in the crowd mimicking your grimace, and you'd laugh if your jaw didn't feel like it was staging a revolt. He pokes your swollen gum with a grimy finger, muttering about bad humors. You're not sure if he means your tooth or his mood, but either way, it's not reassuring. Barber surgeons operated under the medieval belief that the body's four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, needed balance. Toothache? Probably too much black bile. The fix? Yank the tooth or maybe bleed you with a leech. Historians still argue whether these guys believed their own theories or just went through the motions to get paid. You're leaning toward the latter, especially as he brandishes a tool that looks like it was forged in a nightmare. The pliers he's holding are iron, pitted with rust, and probably used to pull nails from horseshoes last week. You imagine the Yelp review you'd leave: 1 star, got tetanus, 0-10 would not recommend. But this is your reality now. He leans in, and you brace yourself, the crowd's murmurs fading into a dull roar. The pain in your jaw is a white-hot pulse, and you're wondering if you'll walk away with fewer teeth or just fewer days to live. Infections were rampant in medieval dentistry. No sterilization, no antibiotics, just a prayer and a quick tug. You're starting to understand why people avoided these dentists unless the pain was unbearable. You glance at his table, cluttered with tools that belong in a dungeon, not a dental office. There's a knife, a hook, and something that looks like a tiny branding iron. You're half expecting him to offer you a stick to bite on. And, yep, there it is. He hands you a splintered piece of wood, saying, "Bite hard, it'll help." Help what? Exactly? Your dignity? Your survival odds? You take the stick, because what else can you do? The crowd's getting restless, and you hear someone bet a copper coin you'll faint. Joke's on them, you're too stubborn for that, but you're not ruling it out. As he grips your tooth with the pliers, you notice his hands aren't exactly steady. Maybe it's the ale, maybe it's just Tuesday. Either way, you're not feeling optimistic. Mainstream history confirms that barber surgeons were often untrained, learning through trial and error, mostly error. A successful tooth pull meant you didn't bleed out or die of sepsis, which was basically a coin toss. You're starting to wish you'd tried that charm seller's tooth demon amulet instead. Speaking of charms, here's a quirky gem. Some medieval folks believed hanging a dead mole around your neck could ward off toothaches. Spoiler, it didn't, but it probably made you the talk of the village. The pliers clamp down, and you feel a jolt that's half pain, half terror. Your eyes water, but you're determined not to give the crowd the show they're hoping for. You focus on the sounds around you. The crackle of the nearby fire, the cluck of a stray chicken, the murmur of the crowd placing side bets. It's like a medieval version of a reality show, and you're the unlucky contestant. The barber surgeon tugs, and you grip the stick so hard it splinters. You're not sure what's worse, the pain or the fact that this guy's probably going to charge you for the privilege. You think back to the monk you saw earlier, scribbling notes. Maybe he's recording this for posterity, or maybe he's just bored. The church had a weird hold on medicine, preaching that pain was God's way of testing your faith. You're not feeling particularly faithful right now, unless faith in surviving this counts. Historians still argue whether the church stifled medical progress or just filled the gaps left by a lack of science. Either way, you're not getting a sermon to numb the pain, just a pair of pliers and a guy who smells like a brewery. The tooth starts to give, and you feel a sickening crunch. The crowd gasps, and you're pretty sure you hear someone cheer. You're not sure if you're more annoyed at them or at the fact that you're still conscious. The barber surgeon grins, holding up your tooth like a trophy. Blood drips onto his apron, and you're wondering if you'll need that monk's prayers after all. Infections were the real killer in medieval dentistry. Pulling a tooth was just the opening act. You're handed a rag to staunch the bleeding, and you press it to your mouth, tasting iron and regret. As you stagger back from the table, the crowd disperses, some clapping you on the shoulder like you've survived a joust. You're not sure if you're a hero or just lucky, but your jaw feels lighter, if not better. The barber surgeon's already eyeing his next customer, and you're left wondering if you'll make it through the week without a fever. You glance at the charm seller, still hawking her amulets. Maybe you'll buy one, just in case. For now, you limp away, the taste of blood lingering, and the village square fades behind you. You stumble away from the barber surgeon's table, the taste of blood still sharp on your tongue, your jaw throbbing like it's got its own heartbeat. The village square hums behind you, but the crowd's moved on, already distracted by a juggler tossing apples. You press the rag to your mouth, wincing at the raw, empty socket where your tooth used to be. The pain's different now, less a burning coal, more a dull ache that pulses with every step. You're not out of the woods yet, because in medieval times, pulling a tooth was just the start of your troubles. Extractions were the main event in this era's dental playbook, a grim necessity when decay or infection took hold. Mainstream history tells us these procedures were done without anesthesia, relying on brute force and a patient's ability to grit their teeth. Well, the ones they had left. You trudge toward a wooden bench by the village well, desperate for a moment to catch your breath. The air carries the scent of damp earth and freshly baked bread, but you're not hungry. Eating sounds like a punishment right now. You sit, the bench creaking under you, and try to ignore the curious stares from a passing milkmaid. She's probably wondering if you'll be back at the barber surgeon's table tomorrow, screaming louder than today. You'd laugh, but it hurts too much. Instead, you think about how medieval folks dealt with this kind of pain. Spoiler, it wasn't pretty. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some believed swallowing a spider's web could numb a toothache. You're not sure if that's desperation or just medieval creativity gone wild, but you're glad you didn't try it. The extraction you just endured was standard for the time, but standard doesn't mean safe. Barber surgeons, or sometimes just overconfident villagers, would yank teeth with whatever tools they had, pliers, chisels, even their bare hands in a pinch. No numbing agents, no sterile conditions, just you and a guy who might have been shoeing a horse an hour ago. You're starting to appreciate that stick you bit on, even if it gave you splinters. Historians still argue whether these extractions were more about relieving pain or just speeding up the inevitable, death by infection. Without antibiotics, a botched pull could turn a bad tooth into a one-way ticket to the grave. You lean back, the well's stone rim cool against your spine, and replay the moment those pliers clamped down. The crunch still echoes in your skull, like a branch snapping in a storm. The barber surgeon didn't even flinch, just tugged until your tooth popped free, blood and all. You're lucky he didn't break your jaw in the process, which wasn't uncommon. Some poor souls ended up with shattered bones or teeth snapped at the root, leaving them worse off than before. You glance at your rag, now stained a rusty red, and wonder if you're really in the clear. The crowd didn't stick around to check on you, and neither did the barber surgeon. He's probably counting his coins by now, ready for the next fool with a toothache. A stray dog trots by, sniffing the ground, and you can't help but envy its carefree grin. Teeth intact, no barber surgeons in sight. You're tempted to make a joke about trading places, but your mouth's too sore for humor. Instead, you think about the tools that got you here. Those pliers weren't designed for precision. They were more like blacksmith's gear, built for pulling nails or bending metal. No wonder the pain felt like your head was being forged on an anvil. You're starting to realize why medieval folks prayed before seeing a dentist. It wasn't just faith, it was survival instinct. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the village. You hear the clank of a blacksmith's hammer and the distant bleat of goats, but your focus is still on that aching socket. You're not alone in this misery. Everyone from peasants to nobles dealt with tooth extractions. Even kings weren't spared, though they might have had fancier pliers. A quirky story comes to mind. Some medieval texts mention using goose fat as a post-extraction balm. Sounds like a slippery solution, and not in a good way. You're sticking with your rag, even if it's not much better. You shift on the bench, trying to find a position that doesn't make your jaw scream. The pain's a constant reminder that you're living in a world where medicine is more art than science, and not the good kind of art. The barber surgeon's idea of aftercare was handing you that rag and shooing you off. No follow-up appointments, no painkillers, just a vague "don't chew on it" as he turned to his next customer. You're starting to wonder if you should have paid the charm seller for that amulet instead. At least it wouldn't have left you bleeding. A breeze carries the scent of lavender from a nearby garden, a small mercy amidst the chaos. You close your eyes, trying to focus on that instead of the ache. But your mind drifts back to the extraction, to the crowd's gasps and the barber surgeon's grunt of satisfaction as he held up your tooth. You're not sure if you're more impressed or horrified that you survived. Mainstream records show that tooth pulling was so common it was practically a rite of passage. Lose a tooth, gain a story, if you lived to tell it. Infections were the real enemy, turning minor procedures into deadly gambles. You're hoping your immune system's up for the challenge, because there's no medieval WebMD to consult. You open your eyes, catching sight of a monk hurrying past, his robes flapping. Maybe he's off to pray for someone else's soul, or maybe he's just late for dinner. The church's role in all this still nags at you. They'd tell you to offer your pain up to God, but you're more interested in not dying from a fever next week. Historians still argue whether the church's influence made people endure bad treatments or seek them out in desperation. Either way, you're not feeling particularly holy right now, just sore and a little lightheaded. The village is quieting down now, the juggler packing up his apples, the milkmaid long gone. You're left with your thoughts and that nagging ache. You're not sure what's next. Maybe a fever, maybe just a long night of wincing. The extraction's over, but the ordeal's far from done. You touch your jaw gingerly, wondering if you'll ever chew without fear again. For now, you're just glad to be sitting here, alive, with one less tooth and a story to tell. You're still slumped on that creaky bench by the village well, the rag pressed to your aching jaw, the metallic taste of blood lingering like an unwelcome guest. The sun's dipping below the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple, and the village is settling into a quieter rhythm. Geese honking faintly, a cartwheel creaking in the distance. Your tooth's gone, but the pain's still there, a dull throb that mocks your hope for relief. You're starting to wonder if there's anything in this medieval world that could actually soothe your misery. That's when you notice a woman nearby, her basket brimming with herbs, muttering about cures as she sorts through leaves and roots. In this era, herbal remedies were the closest thing to a pharmacy, a mainstream practice that offered a flicker of hope for your battered mouth. But, as you're about to learn, hope comes with a side of skepticism. You shuffle toward her, the damp ground squelching under your boots. The air smells of wet straw and something faintly minty from her basket. She glances up, her eyes sharp despite the wrinkles framing them, and sizes you up like you're a sick cow. "Tooth trouble, oh?" she says, not waiting for an answer. You nod, wincing as the motion jostles your jaw. She digs through her basket, pulling out a bundle of green stems and a small clay pot filled with a questionable paste. Herbal remedies were the backbone of medieval medicine, used for everything from fevers to broken bones. Mainstream history confirms that plants like chamomile, sage, and cloves were common in dental care, often boiled into teas or mashed into poultices to ease pain or fight infection. She hands you a sprig of something that smells like a mix of pepper and regret. "Chew this," she instructs, "but don't swallow." You eye the plant, wondering if it's going to help or just make you wish you'd stuck with the barber surgeon's pliers. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some medieval healers mixed herbs with animal dung, cow, horse, even crocodile, for extra potency. You're really hoping this woman skipped the dung part, but you're too sore to ask. You pop the sprig in your mouth, the bitter taste making your eyes water. It's like chewing a garden's worst nightmare, but there's a faint numbing tingle that gives you a sliver of hope. You sit back on the bench, chewing cautiously, the herb's sharp flavor cutting through the blood and pain. The woman rattles off instructions. Steep some sage in hot water, gargle it twice a day, and rub her special paste on your gums. You glance at the pot she's offering, its contents looking like something you'd scrape off a boot. You're not sure if it's medicine or a cruel prank, but desperation makes you pocket it anyway. Historians still argue whether these herbal concoctions were effective or just placebos born of trial and error. Some plants, like cloves, had natural antiseptic properties, but others were as useful as wishing on a star. You're betting on the former, because you're not ready to face those pliers again. The village is growing darker, torches flickering to life along the muddy paths. You hear a dog barking and the low hum of voices from a nearby tavern. The herb's numbing effect is faint but real, and you're grateful for anything that dulls the ache. You think back to the barber surgeon, his rusty tools and zero bedside manner. At least this woman's trying to help, even if her remedies come with a side of mystery. You're starting to realize that medieval dentistry was a patchwork of solutions, some practical, some absurd, all born of a world without science to guide it. You'd make a joke about needing a medieval Yelp to rate these healers, but your jaw's too sore for wit. You lean back, the well stone rim cool against your shoulders, and try to focus on the herb's tingle instead of the pain. The woman's still sorting her basket, muttering about willow bark for fevers and yarrow for wounds. You're tempted to ask for something stronger, but you're not sure you want to know what stronger means in her world. Maybe it's that crocodile dung paste you've heard about. You shudder, and not just from the evening chill. The idea of smearing anything dung-related on your gums is enough to make you appreciate the bitter sprig you're chewing. As you sit there, the village's sounds fade into a soft background hum. A cart rattling, a child laughing, the clink of a blacksmith's hammer winding down for the night. You're starting to feel like you're in a weird medieval ASMR session, except the tingles are from pain, not relaxation. The herbal remedy's helping, but it's no miracle. Your socket still aches, and you're hyper-aware of every throb. You think about the monk you saw earlier, scribbling notes. Maybe he's writing about herbs too, or maybe he's just tallying how many villagers survive their cures. The church often blessed these remedies, claiming divine guidance, but you're not feeling particularly blessed right now. You glance at the clay pot in your hand, its weight a reminder of your leap of faith. The woman said to rub it on your gums before bed, but you're half convinced it'll just give you a new kind of pain. Medieval herbals weren't exactly regulated, too much of the wrong plant, and you're not just toothless but also seeing visions. You'd laugh if it weren't so plausible. Another quirky fact, some healers swore by garlic, believing it could draw out toothache demons. You're starting to think demons are just what they called bacteria before anyone knew what bacteria were. The torchlight casts long shadows, and you notice the woman packing up her basket, ready to move on to the next desperate soul. You're grateful for her help, even if it's a gamble. The herb in your mouth is losing its kick, but the pain's a little less sharp, like a bully who's gotten bored. You're not sure if it's the plant or just your brain begging for a break. Either way, you're clinging to this small victory. Mainstream records show that herbal knowledge came from ancient texts, like those of Galen, filtered through monasteries and local healers. But the gap between knowledge and practice was wide, and you're living in that gap right now. You stand, stretching your legs, the rag still pressed to your jaw. The village feels smaller now, its edges softened by dusk. You're not ready to trust that pace just yet, but you're keeping it close, like a questionable insurance policy. The pain's still there, a constant companion, but the herbal remedy's given you a moment to breathe. You're not sure what's next. Maybe another visit to the barber surgeon, maybe a prayer to whoever's listening. For now, you trudge toward home, the bitter taste of herbs and hope lingering on your tongue. You're trudging back to your hovel, the village now cloaked in twilight, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The clay pot of herbal paste rattles in your pocket, a dubious souvenir from the healer woman, and your jaw still pulses with that stubborn ache. The bitter aftertaste of her sprig lingers, but it's not enough to drown out the memory of the barber surgeon's pliers or the crowd's eager stares. You're starting to wonder if relief is even possible in this world, where toothaches seem to invite more than just pain. They bring superstition, rituals, and a whole lot of weirdness. Medieval folks didn't just fight decay with herbs or pliers. They leaned hard into folklore, believing toothaches were tied to spirits, curses, or even the stars. Mainstream history notes that superstition shaped much of medieval medicine, with dental care often blending practical remedies with outright magical thinking. You push open the creaky door to your home, a small room lit by a single tallow candle flickering on a rough-hewn table. The air smells of straw and faintly of the stew you can't even think about eating right now. You slump onto a stool, the rag still pressed to your jaw, and notice a small charm hanging above the door, a knotted cord with a feather tied to it. Your neighbor swore it keeps tooth demons away, and you're starting to wonder if she's onto something. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some medieval villagers believed burying a tooth under a tree could transfer the pain to the earth. You're tempted to dig up your yard, but you're too tired, and honestly, you're not sure you trust the ground to handle your problems. You set the clay pot on the table, eyeing it like it might bite. The healer's instructions echo in your head. Rub it on your gums, gargle sage, pray for good luck. But in this era, luck often came with a side of mysticism. Toothaches weren't just physical. They were spiritual battles. People thought evil spirits or bad omens could lodge in your teeth, turning a cavity into a cosmic punishment. You're not sure if you buy it, but the charm above the door is making you second-guess yourself. You'd make a joke about needing an exorcist instead of a dentist, but your jaw's not in the mood for humor. You lean back, the stool creaking, and try to imagine what your ancestors would say about your predicament. They'd probably tell you to visit the local wise woman, not the one with herbs, but the one who mutters incantations and waves bones over your head. These rituals were common, especially in rural areas where barbers and herbs weren't enough. You picture yourself sitting cross-legged in a smoky hut, a crone chanting over a bowl of chicken entrails while you clutch your jaw. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely psychological or if people genuinely believed they could banish dental pain. You're leaning toward the former, but you're desperate enough to consider anything. The candle's flame dances, casting shadows that look a little too much like grinning skulls. You shake off the thought, blaming the pain for your overactive imagination. But superstition was a big deal back then. People saw signs everywhere. A toothache during a full moon? Bad news. A crow landing near your house? Worse. Some even thought tooth pain was a punishment for gossiping, which makes you wonder if you've been too chatty at the tavern. You'd laugh, but it hurts too much. Instead, you think about that buried tooth trick again. Maybe it's worth a shot, if only to feel like you're doing something. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your weight. The charm sways gently in the draft, and you're half tempted to take it down and wear it like a necklace. Superstition wasn't just for the uneducated. Nobles and clergy got in on it too. Kings might consult astrologers before a tooth pulling, and monks might bless a patient's mouth with holy water. You're starting to see why that monk you saw scribbling notes looked so serious. Maybe he was recording which charms worked, Or maybe he was just praying for your soul. The church was knee-deep in this stuff, often endorsing rituals as long as they didn't stray too far into pagan territory. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and fish the clay pot out of your pocket. You're not ready to trust it yet, but you're running out of options. The pain's like a guest who won't leave, loud and demanding. You think about the stories you've heard, people tying strings to their teeth and slamming doors to yank them out, or wearing amulets shaped like teeth to ward off pain. A quirky gem comes to mind. Some believed rubbing a frog's belly on your gums could cure a toothache. You're not sure where you'd even find a frog this late, and you're definitely not desperate enough to try. Yet, the village outside is quiet now, the torches dimming, the night settling in like a heavy blanket. You hear an owl hoot, and for a moment, you wonder if it's a sign. Medieval folks would have thought so, probably rushing to a wise woman to decode it. You're starting to get why superstition was so tempting. It gave people something to cling to when the pliers failed. Mainstream records show that dental care often overlapped with religious and magical practices, with healers invoking saints or stars alongside their herbs. You're not ready to pray to Saint Apollonia, the patron of toothaches, but you're not ruling it out either. You glance at the charm again, its feather catching the candlelight. Maybe it's doing something, or maybe it's just a feather. You're too tired to care. The pain's dulled slightly, maybe from the herb you chewed earlier, maybe from sheer exhaustion. You'd make another joke about needing a medieval dentist with a loyalty program, but your heart's not in it. Instead, you think about the healer woman's paste. If it's got dung in it, you're burning it. For now, you set it back on the table, next to the candle, and try to focus on the soft flicker instead of the ache. The night's getting colder, the air sharp with the promise of frost. You pull your cloak tighter, wondering if you'll sleep tonight or just lie there, counting throbs. Superstition might not fix your tooth, but it's a distraction, a way to make sense of a world where pain feels personal. You're starting to understand why people turn to charms and chants. It's not just about curing the body, it's about calming the mind. You're not there yet, but you're close. For now, you sit in the candle's glow, the charm swaying above, and wonder if tomorrow will bring relief or just more stories to tell. You're still in your dimly lit hovel, the tallow candle sputtering on the table, casting jittery shadows that dance like ghosts on the walls. The charm above the door sways in a draft, its feather catching the light, but it's doing nothing for the dull ache in your jaw. The clay pot of herbal paste sits untouched, mocking your hesitation. You're starting to wonder if you're better off praying than trusting that questionable goo. In medieval times, the church was more than just a place for sermons. It was a major player in medicine, including the messy world of dentistry. Mainstream history tells us that clergy often guided health practices, blending faith with healing in ways that could either comfort or confuse. You're leaning toward confused, but you're desperate enough to consider divine intervention. You lean back on your wobbly stool, the floorboards creaking underfoot, the air thick with the greasy smell of the candle and the faint tang of straw. Outside, the village is hushed, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the rustle of wind through thatched roofs. You've heard stories of monks and priests stepping in where barber surgeons and herbwives left off, offering prayers or relics to ease tooth pain. You're picturing yourself kneeling in a chilly stone church, a priest muttering Latin over your head while you clutch your jaw, hoping for a miracle. The church saw suffering as a test of faith, and toothaches were no exception. Saint Apollonia, martyred for her teeth, was the go-to saint for dental woes. You're not sure if praying to her will help, but it beats rubbing frog bellies. You stand, pacing the small room, your boots scuffing the dirt floor. The idea of trudging to the church in the dark isn't appealing, but neither is sitting here with your pain. You glance at the charm again, wondering if it's worth a shot to combine forces, herbs, charms, and now prayers. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some medieval folks believed kissing a holy relic, like a saint's bone, could cure a toothache. You're not sure where the nearest relic is, and you're definitely not kissing any bones tonight. You'd make a joke about needing a saint with better dental hygiene, but your jaw's too sore for wit. The church's role in all this was huge. Priests didn't just pray, they sometimes acted as amateur healers, especially in monasteries where medical knowledge was hoarded like gold. Monks copied ancient texts, like those of Hippocrates, and mixed them with Christian doctrine. Toothaches, they might say, were God's way of reminding you to stay humble. You're not feeling humble. You're feeling like you'd trade your best cow for a modern dentist. Historians still argue whether the church's involvement advanced medicine or held it back by tying every cure to divine will. You're betting on the latter, especially as you imagine a priest sprinkling holy water on your gums instead of offering something practical. You sit again, the stool groaning, and stare at the candle's flame. It's hypnotic, almost enough to distract you from the ache. Almost. You think about the monk you saw in the village square, scribbling notes. Maybe he was writing about Saint Apollonia or cataloguing which prayers worked best for toothaches. The church loved its rituals, masses for the sick, blessings for the suffering. You're starting to wonder if you should head to the church tomorrow. Maybe light a candle for your socket. It's not like you've got better options. The barber surgeon's pliers are a hard no, and that herbal paste is still giving you the side eye. The night's grown colder, the draft sneaking through cracks in the walls. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratchy against your neck. You're picturing the church now, its stone walls damp with age, the air heavy with incense and candle wax. A priest might tell you to offer your pain to God, but you're more interested in keeping your fever at bay. Infections were the real terror in medieval dentistry, and no amount of holy water could stop sepsis. You're starting to see why people clung to faith. It was a lifeline when the physical world offered little but pain and rusty tools. You glance at the clay pot again. Its contents a mystery you're not brave enough to unravel tonight. Maybe the healer woman's paste is blessed, or maybe it's just mud and wishful thinking. You're not sure which is worse. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some villages held tooth masses, where priests chanted specific prayers to banish dental pain. You're imagining a whole congregation muttering for your molar, and it's almost funny, almost. You'd laugh if it didn't hurt to move your face. Instead, you lean forward, resting your elbows on the table, the candle's warmth a small comfort. The village outside is silent now, the stars hidden behind clouds. You hear a faint creak from the roof, probably just the wind, but your superstitious side wonders if it's a sign. Medieval folks would have thought so, rushing to a priest to interpret it. You're starting to get why faith was such a big deal. It gave people something to hold on to when the pliers failed and the herbs didn't work. Mainstream records show that monasteries were often the only places with written medical knowledge, but it was filtered through a lens of religion. A toothache wasn't just decay, it was a spiritual challenge, and you're feeling every bit of that challenge right now. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The charm sways, its feather brushing your shoulder as you pass. You're tempted to take it down, maybe bring it to the church for a blessing. You're not sure if you believe in tooth demons, but you're not ruling them out either. The pain's making you irrational, and you're okay with that. You think about the barber surgeon, the herb woman, and now the church, all pieces of a puzzle that doesn't quite fit. You'd make another joke about needing a medieval HMO, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. The candle's burning low, the wax pooling on the table. You're not ready to sleep, not with the pain keeping you company. You're starting to understand why people turn to the church, not just for healing, but for hope. It's a slim thread, but it's something. You're not there yet, but you're close. For now, you sit back down, the charm overhead, the pot on the table, and the ache in your jaw. Tomorrow, maybe you'll pray. Tonight, you just try to breathe through the pain. The candles flicker your only guide. You're back on that wobbly stool in your hovel, the tallow candle now a stub, its flame barely holding on as it sputters in a pool of wax. The charm above the door still sways, useless against the steady throb in your jaw, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits on the table like a dare you're not ready to take. The village outside is dead quiet, the night thick with the scent of frost and smoke. You're starting to think about the tools that got you into this mess. Not just the barber surgeon's pliers, but the whole terrifying arsenal of medieval dentistry. Mainstream history confirms that dental tools in this era were crude, often borrowed from blacksmiths or carpenters, designed more for brute force than precision. You're picturing that rusty plier again, and your stomach churns at the thought of what else might be in the barber surgeon's toolkit. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood rough under your skin. The memory of that tooth-pulling session in the village square is still fresh, too fresh. The pliers were bad enough, but you've heard stories of other tools. Chisels, hammers, even sharpened sticks used to pry teeth loose. You're not sure if you're more horrified or impressed that anyone survived. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some medieval dentists used a tool called a pelican, a metal contraption shaped like a bird's beak that hooked around a tooth to yank it out. Sounds like something you'd see in a horror movie, not a healer's hands. You'd make a joke about needing a pelican to pluck out your pain, but your jaw's not in the mood for laughs. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The candle's flicker casts long shadows, making the walls seem closer, the air heavier. You're imagining the barber surgeon's table again, cluttered with instruments that look like they belong in a torture chamber. There were dental keys, think a cross between a wrench and a nightmare, used to twist teeth out of their sockets. No anesthesia, no sterilization, just a prayer and a scream. You're starting to understand why people avoided these procedures unless the pain was unbearable. Historians still argue whether these tools were a step forward from earlier methods or just fancier ways to inflict misery. You're betting on misery, especially after your own encounter with those pliers. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to shake off the image of a pelican clamping onto your tooth. The pain in your jaw is a constant reminder of how little these tools cared about your comfort. You think about the barber surgeon's hands, calloused and unsteady, wielding instruments that were probably used to fix cartwheels or shoe horses last week. Hygiene wasn't a thing. Tools were wiped on aprons, if at all, and infections were as common as rain. You're lucky your socket's only aching, not swelling with fever. Yet, you touch your jaw gingerly, wincing at the tenderness, and wonder if you'll ever trust a dentist again. The night's grown colder, the draft sneaking through the walls like an uninvited guest. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratching your neck, and glance at the charm overhead. It's still there, doing nothing but looking pretty. You're starting to think the church's prayers might be a better bet than more tools, but you're not ready to give up on the physical world just yet. You think back to the herb woman's paste, still untouched on the table. Maybe it's safer than another round with the barber surgeon's arsenal, but you're not convinced. You'd rather face a priest's holy water than a dental keys twist. The candle's flame dips, nearly going out, and you lean closer to shield it. The light's your only companion right now, and you're not ready to sit in the dark. You're picturing the tools again, each one more menacing than the last. There were trephines, small drills used to bore into teeth or jaws, often leaving more damage than they fixed. And don't forget the cauterizing irons, heated red-hot to burn away infected tissue. You shudder, imagining the smell of singed flesh mixing with the village square's usual stench of livestock and smoke. You'd make another joke about medieval dentistry being a great weight loss plan. Hard to eat with no teeth, but the thought's too grim to be funny. You pace again, the room feeling smaller with every step. The charm sways, the pot glares, and your jaw keeps up its relentless pulse. You're starting to see why people turn to superstition or the church. Tools like these weren't exactly inspiring confidence. Mainstream records show that dental instruments were often handmade, varying wildly in quality depending on the smith who forged them. A wealthy lord might get a slightly shinier pelican, but for you, it's the same rusty pliers as everyone else. You're starting to appreciate that stick you bit on during the extraction. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. A faint noise outside, a twig snapping, maybe a fox, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain. Or maybe it's the thought of those tools, each one a reminder that medieval dentistry was more about survival than science. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some healers used bow drills, like the ones for starting fires, to grind down decayed teeth. You're picturing the barber surgeon spinning a drill over your open mouth, and it's enough to make you want to hide under the table. You're not sure if it's the pain or the stories making you queasy, but you're leaning toward both. You sit again, the candle's flame steadying, its warmth a small defiance against the cold. You think about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was sketching one of those pelicans, or maybe he was just praying for the souls who faced them. The The church's role in all this feels distant now, overshadowed by the very real threat of iron and rust. You're starting to wonder if you'll need another visit to the barber surgeon, or if the herb woman's paste will be enough. Either way, you're not thrilled about your options. You'd make one last joke about trading your teeth for a time machine, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. The night's settled in, heavy and still, the village a world away. You're left with your thoughts, your pain, and the memory of tools that belong in a nightmare. You're not sure what's next, another extraction, a fever, or just a long night of wincing. For now, you sit, the candles glow your only guide, the charm overhead, the pot on the table, and the ache in your jaw a constant companion. You're still hunched over in your hovel, the tallow candle reduced to a flickering stub, its weak light barely pushing back the darkness. The charm above the door dangles uselessly, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits on the table, still unopened, like a challenge you're too wary to accept. Your jaw throbs, a relentless reminder of the barber surgeon's pliers and the raw socket left behind. The village outside is silent, wrapped in the chill of a late-night frost, the air heavy with the scent of straw and fading smoke. You're starting to think about what got you into this mess in the first place. Not just the toothache, but the food you've been eating. Medieval diets were a dental disaster, a mainstream fact that explains why your teeth feel like they're staging a revolt. The bread, the ale, the tough meat, it's all taken a toll, and you're paying the price. You lean back on the creaky stool, the wood digging into your spine, and try to remember the last meal that didn't make your jaw complain. Bread was the staple, often gritty with stone-ground flour or bits of chaff, wearing down your enamel like sandpaper. You're picturing yourself chewing through a dense rye loaf, the kind that feels like a workout, each bite grinding your teeth a little closer to ruin. Mainstream history confirms that medieval diets were high in abrasive grains and low in anything resembling dental hygiene. Toothwear was so common that by your age, barely past 20, if you're lucky, your teeth are already chipped and crumbling. You're starting to wish you'd been born a noble with access to softer bread, but even they weren't spared. The candle flickers, casting shadows that twist like ghosts on the walls. You think about the ale you drank last week, brewed thick and sweet, sticking to your teeth like glue. Sugar wasn't common, but honey and dried fruits were, and they were just as bad for your mouth. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some medieval folks chewed on fennel seeds to freshen their breath, which sounds nice until you realize their breath probably smelled like a mix of ale and despair. You'd make a joke about needing a medieval mint, but the ache in your jaw kills the humor. You're starting to see why your teeth are in such bad shape. It's not just bad luck. It's the food you've been forcing through them. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The pain in your jaw is a constant nag, like a neighbor who won't stop knocking. You think about the meals you've had lately. Pottage thick with barley, tough mutton that took an hour to chew, and that one time you splurged on dried apples, which was sweet but stuck to your teeth for days. Historians still argue whether poor dental health was more about diet or the lack of hygiene practices. You're betting on both, especially since the closest thing to a toothbrush here is a twig or a rag, and you're not exactly diligent about using either. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and glance at the clay pot. You're still not brave enough to try it, but you're starting to wonder if anything could have saved your teeth from this fate. The diet wasn't just tough on your mouth, it was a slow grind on your whole body. Peasants like you ate coarse bread and watery stews, while nobles had access to refined flour and wine, but everyone's teeth suffered. Even the rich, with their fancy feasts, ended up with cavities from honey-sweetened treats. You're picturing a lord at a banquet, wincing as he bites into a sugared fig, and it's almost comforting to know you're not alone in this dental nightmare. The night's grown colder, the draft sneaking through the walls like a thief. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool rough against your neck, and try to focus on something other than the pain. The candle's flame dips, and you shield it with your hand, its warmth a small rebellion against the chill. You're thinking about the market stalls you passed last week, piled with bread and cheese, none of it kind to your teeth. Cheese was a rare treat, but even that could trap bits in your gums, inviting decay. You're starting to realize that every bite you've taken has been a gamble, and your teeth are losing. A faint noise outside, a rustle, maybe a cat, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of your diet slowly wrecking your mouth. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some medieval folks believed chewing on hard bread could strengthen their teeth, like some kind of dental workout. You're picturing yourself gnawing on a stale loaf, hoping for a miracle, only to chip another tooth. It's almost funny, but the ache in your socket keeps you grounded. You'd make another joke about medieval meal plans doubling as dental torture, but you're too tired, and the pain's too loud. You lean forward, elbows on the table, that would cool under your skin. The charm overhead sways, useless as ever, and you're starting to wonder if the church's prayers or the herb woman's paste could have prevented this. Probably not. Your diet's been working against you from the start, and there's no escaping it. Mainstream records show that tooth decay was rampant across all classes, with skeletons from the period showing worn enamel and abscesses galore. You're lucky to have any teeth left, but that's small comfort when your jaw feels like it's hosting a tiny war. The candles burning low, the wax pooling like a tiny lake. You're not ready to sleep, not with the pain keeping you company. You think about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was noting how many villagers lost teeth to their daily bread. The church might have preached moderation, but it didn't stop people from eating what they could get. You're starting to see why dental care was such a mess. When your food's your enemy, what chance do you have? You touch your jaw, wincing, and wonder if you'll ever chew without fear again. The night's heavy now, the village a distant memory. You're left with your thoughts, your pain, and the realization that every meal's been a step toward this moment. You're not sure what's next, another tooth lost to a loaf, or maybe a fever from that extraction. For now, you sit, the candles glow your only guide, the charm overhead, the pot on the table, and the ache in your jaw a constant reminder of a world that's chewing you up, one bite at a time. You're still in your hovel, the tallow candle long gone, leaving you in near darkness save for a sliver of moonlight creeping through a crack in the wall. The charm above the door hangs still, useless against the persistent ache in your jaw, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits on the table, its mystery untested. The village outside is a void of silence, the frost settling like a heavy blanket, the air sharp with the scent of straw and cold earth. Your mind drifts from the gritty bread that ruined your teeth to the world beyond your hovel, where teeth weren't just a source of pain, they were a badge of status. Mainstream history tells us that in medieval society, your smile, or lack thereof, could mark your place in the social hierarchy, from peasant to noble. Your missing tooth and throbbing socket? They're screaming commoner louder than your patched cloak. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood creaking under you, and try to imagine what your smile says about you now. In this era, a full set of teeth was a rare trophy, especially for someone like you, scraping by on coarse bread and thin stew. Nobles, with their refined flour and softer foods, might keep their teeth longer, but even they weren't immune to decay. You're picturing a lord at a feast, flashing a grin that's more gaps than pearls, trying to impress a lady who's hiding her own crumbling molars. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some wealthy folks paid for false teeth made of bone or ivory, wired to their jaws with gold. Sounds fancy until you realize they'd rot in your mouth faster than your real teeth. You'd make a joke about medieval veneers, but the ache in your jaw snuffs out the humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The moonlight casts a pale glow, making the charm look like a ghostly feather. You're thinking about the village square, where the barber surgeon pulled your tooth in front of everyone. That public spectacle wasn't just about pain, it was a social statement. Peasants like you got their teeth yanked in the open, while nobles might have a private dentist in their castle, if they were lucky. But even privacy couldn't hide a bad smile. A good set of teeth, or at least a few that weren't black, could signal wealth, health, or just dumb luck. You're definitely not feeling lucky right now. The pain in your socket pulses, a reminder of your place in this world. You touch your jaw, wincing, and wonder what the tavern crowd thinks of you now. Probably nothing good. Social status was everything in medieval times, and teeth were a visible scorecard. Historians still argue whether dental health actually influenced marriage prospects or just reflected diet and access to care. You're betting it was a bit of both. Nobody wants to kiss a mouthful of stumps, noble or not. You're starting to see why people went to such lengths to hide their dental woes, from chewing fennel seeds to wearing those creepy bone teeth. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to picture yourself at a village feast. If you ever get invited to one, you'd probably keep your mouth shut, not just because of the pain, but because every gap in your smile tells a story you'd rather not share. The rich could afford to care about appearances. Maybe they'd gargle wine to mask bad breath or pay for a monk to pray over their molars. You're stuck with a rag and a prayer to Saint Apollonia, if you can muster the faith. You're starting to wonder if that charm above the door is doing anything at all, or if it's just another reminder of your low rung on the ladder. The night's grown colder, the moonlight fading as clouds roll in. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool rough against your skin, and glance at the clay pot. You're still not brave enough to try it, but you're starting to think about what it means to be you in this world. A peasant with a missing tooth, no status to lean on. Another quirky story pops up. Some nobles blackened their teeth on purpose, thinking it showed off their wealth by proving they could afford sugar. You're picturing a lord with a deliberately dark grin, and it's almost funny, almost. You'd make another joke about medieval influencers chasing trends, but the pain's too loud for wit. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your arms. The village is a distant memory now, its torches long extinguished. You're thinking about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was noting who had the best teeth, or maybe he was just praying for the souls who couldn't afford to care. The church's role in all this feels far away, overshadowed by the daily grind of survival. You're starting to see why teeth mattered so much. They weren't just for chewing. They were a mirror of your place in the world. Yours are telling a story of hard bread and harder luck. A faint noise outside, a creak, maybe a shutter, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of everyone judging your smile. You're picturing the herb woman, her sharp eyes sizing you up, probably knowing you're too poor for her fanciest cures. Even the barber surgeon treated you like just another tooth to pull. No status to spare you the public humiliation. Mainstream records show that dental care was a luxury, reserved for those who could pay for private healers or imported herbs. You're stuck with the village square and a rag that's seen better days. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The charm brushes your shoulder, its feather soft but useless. You're tempted to rip it down, but you're too tired, and part of you still hopes it might work. You're starting to understand why people clung to appearances, even when their teeth were falling out. A smile could open doors, or at least keep them from slamming shut. You're not sure what's next, another tooth lost to a bad loaf, or a fever from that extraction. For now, you sit back down, the moonlight gone, the pot on the table, and the ache in your jaw a constant reminder of a world where even your smile marks your place. You're still in your hovel, the moonlight long gone, leaving you in a darkness so thick it feels like it's pressing against your skin. The charm above the door is invisible now, just a faint rustle in the draft, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits untouched on the table, its contents a gamble you're too tired to take. Your jaw throbs, a hot, pulsing reminder of the barber surgeon's pliers and the raw socket they left behind. The village outside is silent, locked in the grip of a frosty night, the air heavy with the scent of damp straw and cold earth. Your mind drifts from the social sting of your missing tooth to a darker fear, infection. In medieval times, a toothache wasn't just pain, it could be a death sentence. Mainstream history confirms that infections from dental procedures were a leading cause of death, turning a simple extraction into a deadly dance with fever and sepsis. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood creaking under you, and touch your jaw gingerly. The socket feels warm, too warm, and you're starting to worry it's not just pain you're fighting. You're picturing yourself sweating through a fever, your hovel turning into a sick room as the village whispers about your odds. Infections were the silent killers of medieval dentistry, creeping in through unsterile tools and open wounds. The barber surgeon's pliers, caked with who knows what, probably left more than just a hole in your mouth. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some folks believed smearing honey on an infected socket could draw out the bad humors. Sounds sweet until you realize honey's sticky mess could just feed the infection. You'd make a joke about medieval antibiotics being a jar of honey and a prayer, but the thought of fever chills your humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The darkness makes every sound sharper, the creak of the walls, the faint drip of water somewhere in the corner. You're imagining the barber surgeon's table again, those rusty pliers glistening with blood, yours and others. Hygiene wasn't a word they knew, and tools were wiped on aprons, if at all. You're starting to understand why so many didn't survive a simple tooth pull. Historians still argue whether infections were more deadly because of poor tools or because nobody understood germs. You're betting on both, especially as your jaw feels like it's plotting against you. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to push away the image of your socket swelling, turning red, then worse. The pain's bad enough, but the thought of a fever creeping in is worse. You're picturing the village healer woman, her basket of herbs, maybe offering something for infection, willow bark, garlic, or that dreaded dung paste you're still hoping to avoid. You're not sure if her remedies would help or just speed you toward the churchyard. You glance at the clay pot, its shadow a faint smudge in the dark. Maybe it's got something to fight infection, or maybe it's just another roll of the dice. You're not ready to find out. Not yet. The night's grown colder, the air sharp enough to bite. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratching your neck, and try to focus on something other than the heat in your jaw. You're thinking about the monk you saw, scribbling in the village square. Maybe he was noting who survived their extractions, or maybe he was praying for those who didn't. The church's role feels distant now, its prayers no match for the very real threat of infection. You're starting to see why people feared dental work, not just the pain, but what came after. A toothache could kill you, not with a quick snap, but with a slow, burning fever that no charm or herb could stop. A faint noise outside, a twig snapping, maybe a fox, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of your body turning against you. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some medieval folks believed tying a string around an infected tooth and yanking it could release the sickness. You're picturing yourself trying that, only to end up with a bigger hole and a worse infection. It's almost funny, but the warmth in your jaw keeps you grounded. You'd make another joke about medieval medicine being a game of chance, but the stakes feel too high for wit. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your skin. The charm overhead is silent now, no draft to stir it. You're starting to wonder if you should have tried the herb woman's paste, or maybe sought out the church for a blessing. Anything to keep the fever at bay. Mainstream records show that dental infections often led to abscesses, which could spread to the jaw, the blood, even the brain. Without antibiotics, your odds were grim. Survive the extraction, and you might still lose the war. You're hoping your body's stronger than it feels right now, but the heat in your socket isn't reassuring. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The darkness is oppressive, the cold seeping into your bones. You're tempted to light another candle, but you're out, and the village is too far to fetch one. You're picturing the barber surgeon, his hands steady only because of ale, leaving who knows what in your socket. You're starting to understand why people turned to superstition or prayers. When infection loomed, you needed something to believe in. The herb woman's sprig helped a little, but it's long worn off, and the pain's sharper now, tinged with that worrying warmth. The village is a world away, its people sleeping or praying or maybe fighting their own fevers. You're alone with your thoughts, your pain, and the fear of what's brewing in your jaw. You think about the charm, the paste, the church, all pieces of a puzzle that's missing the one piece you need: a cure. You'd make one last joke about needing a medieval hazmat suit, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. You sit back down, the table your only anchor, the pot a silent taunt, and the pain in your jaw a ticking clock, counting down to who knows what. You're still huddled in your dark hovel, the air thick with the chill of frost and the faint must of straw. The charm above the door silent. In voting rights in the US have a complex history, shaped by constitutional amendments, landmark legislation, and ongoing struggles for equitable access. The 15th Amendment, 1870, granted voting rights to citizens regardless of race, but discriminatory practices like poll taxes and literacy tests persisted for decades. The 19th Amendment, 1920, extended voting to women, though many women of color still faced barriers. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a turning point, outlawing discriminatory practices and enforcing federal oversight in areas with a history of voter suppression. Mainstream history highlights these milestones, but access remained uneven, especially for marginalized groups. A quirky tidbit: some states used grandfather clauses to exempt white voters from literacy tests if their ancestors voted before the Civil War, a sneaky loophole to disenfranchise black voters. Historians still argue whether the Voting Rights Act fully leveled the playing field or merely shifted the battleground. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood creaking under you, and touch your jaw, the warmth in the socket making your stomach twist. You're picturing yourself in a fevered haze, the village gossiping about your fate while a traveling tooth puller sets up shop in the square. These wanderers were a medieval staple, roaming from town to town with a bag of tools and promises of quick fixes. Mainstream history notes they were often showmen, drawing crowds with music or tricks before yanking teeth. You're imagining one now, a flashy stranger with a lute and a grin, offering to cure your pain for a coin. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some tooth pullers claimed their tools were blessed by saints, a marketing ploy to lure desperate souls. You'd laugh at the hustle, but your jaw's too sore for humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The darkness feels heavier now, the cold seeping through your cloak. You're thinking about the village square, where a tooth puller might be pitching his tent, his table littered with pliers and charms. These charlatans were part dentist, part performer, and all opportunist. They'd pull a tooth in front of a cheering crowd, maybe juggle a few apples to keep things lively. You're picturing yourself stepping up, coin in hand, hoping this guy's better than the barber surgeon. Spoiler, he probably isn't. Historians still argue whether these wanderers helped spread dental knowledge or just spread misery with their dirty tools. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to shake off the image of a tooth puller's grimy hands in your mouth. The pain in your socket is sharper now, tinged with that worrying heat. You're starting to wonder if you should have tried the herb woman's paste, or maybe tracked down one of these traveling dentists. You're picturing their wagons, painted with crude tooth symbols, promising miracles they couldn't deliver. Infections were their legacy, just like the barber surgeons, and you're not keen on rolling the dice again. You glance at the clay pot, its shadow a faint blur in the dark. Maybe it's safer than a charlatan's pliers, but you're not convinced. The night's grown colder, the air biting through the cracks in the walls. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool rough against your neck, and try to focus on something other than the ache. You're thinking about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was noting the tooth puller's arrival, or maybe he was praying for the fools who trusted them. The church's role feels distant now, its prayers no match for the very real threat of infection. You're starting to see why people fell for these wanderers. They offered hope, even if it was wrapped in lies. A good show could make you forget the pain, at least until the fever set in. A faint noise outside, a rustle, maybe a stray dog, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of another stranger poking at your jaw. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some tooth pullers carried lucky teeth, claiming they were from saints or heroes, and sold them as charms. You're picturing yourself buying one, only to find it's just a cow's tooth painted white. It's almost funny, but the heat in your socket keeps you grounded. You'd make another joke about medieval dentistry being a traveling circus, but the fear of infection kills the wit. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your skin. The charm overhead is silent, no draft to stir it. You're starting to wonder if you should have sought out a tooth puller, or stuck with the herb woman's remedies. Mainstream records show these wanderers were often blamed for botched extractions, leaving patients with broken jaws or worse. Their tools were no cleaner than the barber surgeons, and their cures were often just theatrics. You're hoping your socket holds out, but the warmth isn't promising. You're picturing the village square tomorrow, a tooth puller strumming his lute, promising to fix what the barber surgeon broke. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The darkness is suffocating, the cold sinking into your bones. You're tempted to head to the square, see if a tooth puller's set up shop, but the thought of more pliers stops you. You're starting to understand why people trusted these charlatans. When pain and fear take over, you'll believe anything. The herb woman's sprig is a faint memory, its numbing long gone. You think about the church, the monk, the paste, all pieces of a puzzle that's missing the cure you need. You'd make one last joke about needing a medieval health inspector, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. You sit back down, the table your anchor, the pot a silent taunt, and the pain in your jaw a ticking clock, warning of worse to come. You're still in your hovel, shrouded in darkness, the air heavy with the bite of frost and the faint must of straw. The charm above the door hangs motionless, offering no relief for the throbbing heat in your jaw, and the clay pot of herbal paste remains untouched on the table, a silent challenge you're too wary to accept. The village outside is locked in the stillness of a frosty night, the only sound a distant owl's hoot cutting through the cold. Your mind drifts from the flashy tooth pullers to a quieter, often overlooked group in this dental nightmare: women. Beyond the herb woman you met, women in medieval times played surprising roles in dental care, often as healers or midwives dabbling in remedies for toothaches. Mainstream history notes that women, excluded from formal medical guilds, were key in passing down oral traditions of healing, especially in villages where men like the barber surgeon dominated the public stage. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood creaking under you, and touch your jaw, the warmth in the socket making your pulse quicken. You're picturing the herb woman again, her sharp eyes and basket of green stems, but now you're thinking of others like her. Mothers, sisters, or wise women who mixed poultices and whispered cures in smoky hovels. These women weren't just tossing herbs into pots. They were the backbone of community health, especially for those too poor for a barber surgeon's coin. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some women used breast milk as a toothache remedy, believing it could soothe inflamed gums. You're not sure if that's genius or just desperate, but you're glad you didn't get that suggestion. You'd make a joke about medieval moms doubling as dentists, but the ache in your jaw snuffs out the humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The darkness feels oppressive, the cold seeping through your cloak like a warning. You're imagining a wise woman in a nearby village, her hands steady as she grinds cloves into a paste, maybe chanting a soft prayer to Saint Apollonia for good measure. These women didn't have the barber surgeon's pliers or the tooth puller's flair, but they had knowledge, passed down through generations. You're starting to wonder if you should have sought out someone like that instead of trusting the village square spectacle. Historians still argue whether women's contributions to medieval medicine were undervalued or simply erased by male-dominated records. You're betting on erased, especially as you recall the herb woman's quiet confidence. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to push away the fear of infection creeping into your socket. The warmth is worrying, a sign you can't ignore much longer. You're picturing a woman healer now, maybe an old widow who knows every plant in the forest, offering you a tea of chamomile or a poultice of yarrow to keep the fever at bay. These women were often the first call for villagers like you, before the barber surgeon's pliers or the church's prayers. You glance at the clay pot, wondering if it holds a woman's wisdom or just a risky gamble. You're not ready to try it, but the idea of a gentler hand, someone who's not waving rusty tools, feels like a small comfort. The night's grown colder, the air sharp enough to sting your skin. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool rough against your neck, and try to focus on something other than the heat in your jaw. You're thinking about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was noting a woman healer's work, or maybe he was dismissing it as witchcraft. The church had a complicated relationship with these women. Some were blessed for their remedies, others shunned as heretics. You're starting to see why women's roles were so vital yet so hidden. When the pliers failed and the tooth pullers moved on, it was the village women who patched people up, one herb at a time. A faint noise outside, a creak, maybe a shutter, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of infection taking hold. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some women healers used spider webs to pack bleeding sockets, believing they'd stop the blood and ward off evil spirits. You're picturing yourself with a cobweb-stuffed mouth, and it's almost funny, almost. You'd make another joke about medieval dentistry being a web of bad ideas, but the fear of fever keeps you grounded. You're starting to wonder if you should seek out a wise woman, someone who knows more than the herb woman you met. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your skin. The charm overhead is still, no draft to stir it. You're thinking about the herb woman again, her basket of stems and her sharp gaze. Maybe she learned from her mother, or an aunt who knew the forest's secrets. Mainstream records show that women often filled the gaps in medieval healthcare, especially in rural areas where guilds didn't reach. They weren't written about much, but their remedies, cloves for pain, sage for swelling, kept villages alive. You're hoping your socket doesn't need more than a woman's touch, but the warmth isn't promising. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The darkness is suffocating, the cold sinking into your bones. You're tempted to head out, find a wise woman who might have a better remedy than the barber surgeon's pliers or the tooth puller's tricks. You're picturing her now, maybe stirring a pot of herbs by candlelight, her hands steady where the barber surgeons shook. You're starting to understand why people trusted these women. When pain and fear took over, their quiet knowledge felt like a lifeline. The church's prayers and the tooth puller's showmanship couldn't match the practicality of a poultice made with care. The village is a world away, its people sleeping or praying or maybe nursing their own aches. You're alone with your thoughts, your pain, and the fear of what's brewing in your jaw. You think about the charm, the paste, the church, all pieces of a puzzle that's missing the cure you need. You'd make one last joke about needing a medieval women's health network, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. You sit back down, the table your anchor, the pot a silent taunt, and the pain in your jaw a ticking clock, warning of worse to come. You're still slumped in your hovel, the darkness so thick it feels like a weight on your chest, the air sharp with frost and the faint tang of damp straw. The charm above the door is a ghost in the shadows, useless against the hot, pulsing ache in your jaw, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits untouched on the table, its promise of relief feeling more like a taunt. The village outside is silent, gripped by a cold that seeps through the walls, the only sound a faint wind rattling the thatch above. Your mind shifts from the women healers to the grim reality of your body's fight. In medieval times, surviving a tooth extraction was only half the battle. The real war was against the after effects, swelling, fever, and the creeping dread of losing more than just a tooth. Mainstream history confirms that post-extraction complications were common, with many succumbing to infections or chronic pain due to crude methods and no real aftercare. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood groaning under you, and press a hand to your jaw, the warmth in the socket sending a jolt of fear through you. You're picturing yourself days from now, your face swollen, your body burning with fever, the village shunning you as if your pain were a curse. Aftercare in this era was nearly non-existent. Barber surgeons didn't offer follow-ups, and healers like the herb woman gave you a poultice and a shrug. You're starting to wonder if that clay pot holds anything to keep the swelling down, or if it's just another step toward the churchyard. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some medieval folks gargled with vinegar to cleanse a socket, believing it could burn away bad humors. Sounds like a recipe for agony, and you're not desperate enough to try, yet. You'd make a joke about medieval aftercare being a bottle of vinegar and a prayer, but the heat in your jaw kills the humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards creaking under your boots. The darkness makes every sound sharper, the wind's low moan, the faint drip of water in a corner. You're thinking about the barber surgeon again, his blood-stained apron and unsteady hands, offering no advice beyond don't chew on it. You're picturing the herb woman's sprig, its faint numbing effect long gone, leaving you with nothing but pain and worry. Post-extraction care was a gamble, often left to the patient's own wits or the mercy of a neighbor's remedy. Historians still argue whether the high death rates after dental work were due to infection or the body's inability to heal without proper nutrition or rest. You're betting on all of it, especially as your socket feels like it's staging a rebellion. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to push away the image of your jaw swelling, the pain spreading like fire. You're picturing the village square, now empty, where the barber surgeon's table stood, its tools likely still caked with your blood. You're wondering if you should have pressed the herb woman for more, maybe a tea to cool the heat, or a poultice to draw out the bad. You glance at the clay pot, its shape barely visible in the dark. Maybe it's got sage or yarrow, something to keep the fever at bay, or maybe it's just mud and hope. You're not ready to find out, but the warmth in your jaw is making the decision harder to avoid. The night's grown colder, the air slicing through your cloak like a blade. You pull the wool tighter, its roughness scraping your neck, and try to focus on something other than the ache. You're thinking about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was noting the barber surgeon's work, or maybe he was praying for those who didn't survive it. The church's role feels distant now, its blessings no match for the very real threat of a festering socket. You're starting to see why aftercare was so critical yet so neglected. When survival was a daily fight, who had time to fuss over a tooth? But you're fussing now, because the alternative is too grim to face. A faint noise outside, a rustle, maybe a leaf caught in the wind, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of your body failing you. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some villagers packed sockets with crushed nettles, believing the sting would shock the infection away. You're picturing yourself wincing through that, only to end up with a mouth full of blisters. It's almost funny, but the heat in your socket keeps you grounded. You'd make another joke about medieval dentistry being a test of endurance, but the fear of what's coming next chokes the wit. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your skin. The charm overhead is silent, no breeze to stir it. You're thinking about the herb woman again, her basket of stems and her curt instructions. Maybe she knew more about aftercare than she let on, or maybe she assumed you'd figure it out. Mainstream records show that post-extraction remedies were often herbal. Cloves for pain, chamomile for swelling, but application was spotty, and results were luck of the draw. You're hoping your body can fight this without help, but the warmth in your jaw isn't promising. You're picturing a wise woman, maybe one who'd visit at dawn, bringing a poultice that actually works. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The darkness is suffocating, the cold sinking into your bones. You're tempted to head out, find someone, anyone, who knows how to keep a socket from turning deadly. You're picturing a neighbor, maybe a woman who's nursed her own family through fevers, offering you a tea or a prayer. You're starting to understand why aftercare fell to the community. When the experts walked away, it was up to villagers to save each other. The barber surgeon's pliers, the tooth puller's tricks, even the herb woman's sprig. They're all fading memories, leaving you with just your pain and a ticking clock. The village is a world away, its people sleeping or praying or maybe fighting their own battles. You're alone with your thoughts, your fear, and the heat in your jaw, warning of worse to come. You think about the charm, the paste, the church, all pieces of a puzzle that's missing the cure you need. You'd make one last joke about needing a medieval triage nurse, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. You sit back down, the table your only anchor, the pot a silent taunt, and the pain in your jaw a relentless reminder of a world where survival is never guaranteed. You're still trapped in your hovel, the darkness pressing in like a living thing, the air sharp with frost and the faint dampness of straw. The charm above the door is a faint outline, useless against the searing ache in your jaw, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits untouched on the table, its promise of relief overshadowed by your growing dread. The village outside is a frozen void, the only sound a faint wind clawing at the thatch above. Your mind shifts from the grim reality of post-extraction complications to the faint hope of recovery, or at least survival. In medieval times, surviving a tooth extraction without infection was a miracle, and those who did often carried scars, both physical and mental, from the ordeal. Mainstream history confirms that recovery was a long, uncertain process, with no guarantees of returning to normalcy, especially for peasants like you with little access to care or rest. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood creaking under you, and press a hand to your jaw, the heat in the socket sending a spike of panic through you. You're picturing yourself weeks from now, assuming you make it that far, your face gaunt, your smile forever changed by the gap where your tooth once was. Recovery meant more than healing a wound. It meant relearning how to eat, how to speak, how to face the village without shame. You're starting to wonder if the herb woman's paste could help you get there, or if it's just another false hope. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some medieval folks chewed on soft willow twigs after extractions, believing the sap could ease pain and speed healing. Sounds better than vinegar, but you're not sure where you'd find a willow tree in the dark. You'd make a joke about medieval recovery being a stick and a dream, but the pain in your jaw snuffs out the humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards groaning under your boots. The darkness amplifies every sound, the wind's low howl, the faint creak of the walls settling in the cold. You're thinking about the barber surgeon again, his pliers leaving you with a hole and no plan for what comes next. You're picturing the herb woman, her sprig long faded, her paste still a mystery. Recovery in this era was left to chance, or to the patient's ability to scrounge up remedies and endure. Historians still argue whether survival rates were low because of infection or because of the body's exhaustion from constant labor and poor diet. You're betting on all of it, especially as your socket feels like it's fighting a losing battle. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and try to push away the image of your jaw turning septic, the pain swallowing you whole. You're picturing the village square, now a distant memory, where the barber surgeon's table stood, its tools likely still filthy. You're wondering if you should have begged the herb woman for more, a tea to calm the heat, a poultice to soothe the swelling. You glance at the clay pot, its shape barely discernible in the dark. Maybe it holds chamomile or cloves, something to guide you toward recovery, or maybe it's just another gamble. You're not ready to try it, but the heat in your jaw is making you rethink your caution. The night's grown colder, the air slicing through your cloak like a knife. You pull the wool tighter, its roughness scraping your neck, and try to focus on something other than the ache. You're thinking about the monk you saw, scribbling in the square. Maybe he was noting who survived their extractions, or maybe he was praying for those who faced the long road to recovery. The church's role feels far away now, its prayers no match for the very real threat of a festering wound. You're starting to see why recovery was so rare. When every day was a fight for food and warmth, who had the strength to heal? But you're fighting now, because the alternative is too dark to face. A faint noise outside, a snap, maybe a branch underfoot, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of your body giving out. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some villagers believed tying a cloth soaked in ale around the jaw could cool a socket and aid healing. You're picturing yourself with a boozy rag strapped to your face, and it's almost funny, almost. You'd make another joke about medieval recovery being a drunken bandage, but the fear of infection keeps you grounded. You're starting to wonder if you should seek out a wise woman at dawn, someone who knows how to guide a body back from the brink. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your skin. The charm overhead is still, no breeze to stir it. You're thinking about the herb woman again, her basket of stems and her terse advice. Maybe she knew something about recovery, a secret she didn't share because you didn't ask. Mainstream records show that post-extraction recovery often relied on herbal remedies, yarrow to stop bleeding, sage to reduce swelling, but success depended on luck and the patient's strength. You're hoping your body has some fight left, but the heat in your jaw isn't reassuring. You're picturing a wise woman, maybe one who'd bring a poultice that smells of earth and hope. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The darkness is suffocating, the cold sinking into your bones. You're tempted to head out, find someone, anyone, who knows how to help you heal. You're picturing a neighbor, maybe a woman who's seen her family through fevers, offering you a tea or a prayer. You're starting to understand why recovery was a community effort. When the experts left you bleeding, it was up to villagers to pull each other through. The barber surgeon's pliers, the tooth puller's tricks, even the herb woman's sprig. They're all fading memories, leaving you with just your pain and a faint hope of seeing the dawn. The village is a world away, its people sleeping or praying or maybe nursing their own wounds. You're alone with your thoughts, your fear, and the heat in your jaw, a warning of what might come. You think about the charm, the paste, the church, all pieces of a puzzle that's missing the cure you need. You'd make one last joke about needing a medieval recovery ward, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. You sit back down, the table your only anchor, the pot a silent taunt, and the pain in your jaw a relentless reminder of a world where healing is a luxury you can't afford. You're still hunched in your hovel, the darkness a suffocating shroud, the air biting with frost and the faint reek of damp straw. The charm above the door is a useless shadow, offering no solace for the burning ache in your jaw, and the clay pot of herbal paste sits untouched on the table, its contents a final, untested gamble. The village outside is a frozen wasteland, silent save for the occasional creak of settling frost, the world holding its breath as you face the end of this grueling ordeal. Your mind drifts from the faint hope of recovery to the stark reality of your place in this medieval world. A peasant, battered by pain, clinging to scraps of hope in a society where dental care was as much about survival as it was about suffering. Mainstream history underscores that medieval dentistry was a patchwork of desperation, ingenuity, and sheer endurance, leaving you to wonder if you'll emerge from this with anything more than scars. You shift on the wobbly stool, the wood groaning under you, and press a hand to your jaw, the heat in the socket a relentless warning. You're picturing yourself at the end of this, maybe weeks or months from now, if you're lucky enough to dodge the fever. Your face might be thinner, your smile forever altered, but alive, chewing soft pottage, avoiding the village square stares. Or maybe you won't make it, your hovel becoming a tomb, the village muttering about curses or bad humors. You're starting to see the herb woman's paste not as a cure, but as a final act of defiance against the pain. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some medieval folks believed a toothache's end, whether by healing or death, was a sign of divine judgment. You're not sure if you're being judged, but you'd rather not find out. You'd make a joke about needing a medieval exit strategy, but the ache in your jaw chokes the humor. You stand, pacing the small room, the floorboards creaking under your boots. The darkness sharpens every sound, the wind's faint moan, the drip of water somewhere in the corner. You're thinking about the barber surgeon's pliers, the herb woman's sprig, the monk's prayers, all the pieces of this nightmare that led you here. Medieval dentistry wasn't just about teeth. It was about navigating a world where pain was a constant, and relief was a luxury. You're picturing the village square, now empty, its torches long extinguished, the stage where your tooth was yanked for all to see. Historians still argue whether these practices were a crude step toward modern medicine or a brutal dead end. You're betting on brutal, especially as your socket pulses with heat that feels like betrayal. You sit again, the stool wobbling, and stare into the dark where the clay pot waits. The pains of fire now, spreading through your jaw, and you're starting to wonder if you've delayed too long. You're picturing the herb woman's face, her sharp eyes daring you to trust her. Maybe the paste is your last shot at avoiding the fever, or maybe it's just another way to lose. You're thinking about the wise women, the tooth pullers, the church, all the hands that tried to shape your fate, none of them offering a clear path to the end. Mainstream records show that those who survived dental ordeals often did so through sheer grit, their bodies outlasting the odds. You're hoping you've got that grit, but the heat in your jaw isn't reassuring. The night's grown colder, the air a blade against your skin. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool rough and heavy, and try to focus on the faint hope of dawn. You're thinking about the monk again, his quill scratching in the square. Maybe he was writing about you, or maybe he was just tallying the village's losses. The church's prayers, the charms, the herbs, they're all fading now, leaving you with just your pain and a choice. You glance at the clay pot, its shape a faint smudge in the dark. Maybe it's time to try it, to end this one way or another. You're picturing yourself rubbing the paste on your gums, the taste bitter but maybe, just maybe, bringing relief. A faint noise outside, a rustle, maybe a fox, makes you pause. You're jumpy, and you blame the pain, or maybe the thought of this being your final night. Another quirky story comes to mind. Some villagers believed the end of a toothache, whether by healing or death, came with a vision of Saint Apollonia, her serene face promising peace. You're not seeing any saints, just the dark and the pot. You'd make another joke about medieval dentistry being a one-way ticket to visions, but the fear of what's next keeps you silent. You're starting to wonder if the paste is your last act of hope, or just a surrender to the inevitable. You lean forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under your skin. The charm overhead is still, no draft to stir it. You're thinking about the herb woman's words. Rub it on your gums, gargle sage, pray for luck. Maybe luck's all you've got left. Mainstream records show that medieval dental care ended in one of two ways: recovery, rare and hard one, or death, often slow and septic. You're hoping for the former, but the heat in your jaw feels like it's writing a different story. You reach for the pot, your fingers brushing its clay, cold and rough. You're not sure if you're ready, but the pain's making the choice for you. You stand again, restless, and pace to the door. The darkness is a weight, the cold a reminder of how fragile you are. You're picturing the village at dawn, the square stirring to life, maybe a wise woman passing by with a better remedy. You're starting to understand why people clung to hope, even when it came in a questionable pot. The barber surgeon's pliers, the tooth puller's tricks, the church's prayers, they're all part of a world where pain was your teacher and survival your prize. You open the pot, the scent sharp and earthy, and dip a finger into the paste. It's gritty, like mud mixed with promise. You rub it on your gums, wincing at the sting, but there's a faint cooling that feels like a whisper of hope. The village is a world away, its people sleeping or praying or maybe facing their own ends. You're alone with your pain, your fear, and the paste's faint tingle, a fragile thread tying you to tomorrow. You think about the charm, the monk, the herb woman, all pieces of a puzzle that's led you to this moment. You'd make one last joke about medieval dentistry being a cruel tutor, but you're too tired, and the ache's too loud. You sit back down, the table your anchor, the pot empty now, and the pain in your jaw a fading fire. Its end uncertain but finally, maybe, within reach. You wake to a grey dawn, the hovel cold but no longer suffocating. The pain in your jaw is duller, the heat less fierce, though it's too soon to call it victory. The clay pot sits empty, its paste a bitter memory on your tongue, but the faint cooling lingers, a sign your body might be fighting back. The charm above the door catches the morning light, just a feather and string, but you're not ready to tear it down. The village stirs outside, the clatter of carts and voices a reminder that life goes on, with or without your tooth. You're scarred, physically and mentally, but alive, a survivor of medieval dentistry's brutal lessons. You step outside, the air sharp but clean, and head toward the square, ready to face the world with one less tooth and a story to tell.